Hello and welcome to Real Insights. Today we're talking with Kevin Whelan, founder of Wealthbuilders.
Hi Kevin, welcome to the Real Insights podcast.
Looking forward to contributing any way I can.
And so today we're talking about pensions and retirement savings generally. And Kevin, you are the founder of Wealthbuilders. So tell me, what's Wealthbuilders? What's it all about?
It should do what it says on the tin, really. It's the only completely holistic and independent company in the UK that helps people understand the difference between trading time for money, so just really building up their retirement, from the proceeds of a job or a business, as opposed to building and owning assets that fundamentally change the way that they can retire so much earlier. So instead of waiting till they're in their 60s and 70s, for most people within 3 to 7 years, so say 5 years typically, if they take the right steps, they follow the right guidance, they work in the right community, they can become completely financially independent within 5 years. So I'd much rather focus on that, because 95% of the population in the UK and in America, come to that, never ever become financially dependent. In other words, the time for money trap means they've got so little left over, not least because they don't understand how their pensions work. And that's an interesting point when it comes to how the whole landscape of pensions have changed over recent years.
And what do you define financially independent to mean?
Okay, so if you can picture a sum of money, let me actually take a step back. We try and suggest people have two outcomes: financial security, then financial independence. Or what is security? Imagine the lockdown lifestyle. You didn't do an awful lot. You didn't go away to lots of places. You probably didn't, go on holiday too much. What would that income level need to be to match your expenses? So whether it's 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, doesn't matter what the number is. That's security. And the purpose, firstly, for Wealthbuilders is to help people reach financial security so that they can afford to get their time back. So they no longer need to work or be in a business. They don't have to be to generate enough income, and then they can focus on building more assets more quickly with more focus to become financially independent, meaning you can live the lifestyle you want. Whether you turn left or right on an aeroplane, how many holidays whatever the number is for you, doesn't really matter what it is. It's a unique and personal thing. Then that's financial independence. And the purpose of reaching financial independence is twofold. One, so that you're completely financially bulletproof for the rest of your life, because you've got multiple streams of recurring income. Most people just have one, which is their pension. And secondly, if you can think through just the definition, at least from my perspective, an asset is something you own that isn't you, and it puts money in your bank account while you're asleep, and you could pass that on if you're no longer here. So the money shows up even if you don't show up. Now, what that means then, if you think that through, is you have to create a legacy plan. Because if you own assets that generate income continually, even if you're not there, that income's going to flow.
Right.
So you start to become a steward of money, planting a tree for the next generation to shade under. And that is a very elegant way to frame the whole wealth building concept, as opposed to the current regime, which is most people work lockstep, get a job, save a little bit, put it into a house, get a bit of pension, maybe take out an ISA or two and have some cash in the bank and hope for the best. I think it's much more relevant today to be involved, to be participating, and not delegating the money, but to be part of the process instead of apart from it.
You mentioned how the sort of retirement saving landscape has changed over time.
Yeah.
So I used to work for a large institutional investment manager. We were doing investing in commercial property. And we had what they call defined benefit pension schemes were our biggest clients. And so those schemes were set up where employers would work for a company for a period of time. And then when they were about to retire, they would receive a percentage of their final salary on retirement. And they would receive that might be sort of 50% up to 2/3 of their salary. And they would receive it from the time they retire until the day they die, basically. So an annuity from retirement onwards. But the real interesting debate in the commercial property and investment manager space was all of these defined benefit pension schemes, with very few exceptions, are now in wind down. So if you start working for a large company today, you're not going to be enrolled in that final salary pension scheme.
Yeah.
So that recurring income from the day you retire until the day you pass away is gone, right? So that retirement and that is a dramatic shift, I think, in the retirement landscape, not only in the UK but in other parts of the world as well. What does that sort of mean to you?
Well, it means that the dramatic shift that you referred to means the very foundations, the fabric on which most people's retirement were built, going back decades, those foundations have crumbled completely.
Yeah.
But the sad thing is people haven't realised it. And there are only a few final salary schemes left, mostly now public sector, which is a challenge because there's no money backing that up. It's future taxpayers, so there's not really an asset allocation there. But as increasingly people have to take on that responsibility, but they haven't understood either how assets should be allocated or even that the risk has been transferred entirely from the employer to themselves.
Correct, yeah.
And Warren Buffett said it brilliantly, which is risk is when you don't know what you are doing. And most people just don't know what they're doing. So they hope and pray that somebody wearing a suit or somebody in a room somewhere knows more than they do and are taking care of their retirement. And it's not happening.
Yeah, because I think what would have previously happened is the trustees of that pension scheme would have been taking regular meetings to work out what the asset allocation should be so that the company is able to fund those liabilities, those pension payments.
Yeah.
But they spend a lot of time doing that. Now that it's transferred to the individual, so I'm not part of a defined benefit pension scheme, so I'm working, I'm saving money, but I'm not necessarily dedicating time, or I'm not a skilled sort of custodian of my assets. I'm not learning how to take control of my assets so that I will be able to fund my own pension liabilities when I retire. So I think that's a really interesting shift in the way that retirement savings are dealt with now.
Yeah.
But there are some specific vehicles that can assist with retirement saving. I'm talking about the common ones like Ssas and Sipps. How do they fit into the mix in terms of retirement savings and retirement planning in your view?
I think the difficulty is it's great that there are vehicles, and it's great that there are, I suppose, tax-free vehicles or tax-favoured vehicles. Ssas being tax-free, pensions, or at least at the moment anyway, still qualified for tax relief and still free of inheritance tax and capital gains tax. So currently very efficient from a long-term planning point of view. But I've got two things to say about that. One is it's predicated on you can only retire in the long term. That the whole industry encourages long-term saving into stock market portfolios, risk-weighted portfolios in some way, focusing on accumulation of a nest egg.
Right.
The challenge when you get a nest egg is unless you've really understood how the conversion of the money takes place. Now, in the defined benefit, it was easy, wasn't it? You just survived.
Yep.
But now you've got to convert the eggs in the basket into spendable eggs when you retire.
Yep.
How do you manage that if the stock market is volatile, if something challenging changes in the world? And we're seeing that. We've seen crashes in 2000, 2008, 2020. How do people manage fundamentally eking out a retirement for the long term when there's no stable currency of exchange between the money they've got in a pot and the nest egg? And what happens then is people start to worry that they're going to run out of money.
Yep.
So instead of a retirement to look forward to, they're now fearing it because they're getting into retirement. Many people in this country get to retirement and they haven't got enough money either in the pot, don't know how the exchange rate works because the change to more flexible retirement. Annuities took a bit of a knock when interest rates fell. Obviously, they're coming back a little bit. But this is lack of knowledge. And I think the key for me is if you don't have enough knowledge, you just stop participating. And to me, it's the participation. So those who take an active interest in ISA, so many more flexible ways to use ISA. ISA can invest in crowdfunding, ISAs can invest in the stock market, but it's that diversification, that experience comes from that, and also not putting all your eggs in one stock market basket. Because if you've got your ISAs in the stock market and your pension in the stock market, and you don't understand how the stock market works, it's a pretty difficult set of futures to run your life by.
Yeah.
It's a difficult one. So I think the more they can diversify and start to understand the need for other assets like property, because of the stability of property and the way that the asset works differently compared to shares in a basket. If you've got portfolios of property either held in real estate investment trusts or direct investments, or even increasingly people buying commercial premises for themselves and looking to be a commercial landlord where they own the property and then they own the rental flow from it. Now, if you do that, and I'm not suggesting it's for everyone, but if you can do that, then if you've got a good covenant and a good piece of property, then you've got a rental income that gives you the basis on which you can understand how does my income flow work when I reach retirement. So it's a big challenge for people to get to grips with not just the language, but all of the options they've got, unless they're willing to put some time into it.
So a lot more of the responsibility is now on individuals to fund their retirement. I think that's pretty fair to say. And the government has helped with the creation of things like ISAs and SIPs, which are tax efficient ways to pool money in order to get an accumulated sum at the time when you retire. But just creating the vehicles for people to efficiently create wealth for retirement doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to do it, right? So, and I guess that's where your community, advises people and kind of guides and educates people towards ways to effectively use those retirement savings vehicles.
I think our focus is much more on cash flow as opposed to accumulation.
Okay.
If you just accumulate and build a nest egg, then you're worried about spending the eggs in your basket. But if you build cash flow, you've got assets that are genuinely cash flowing, then the cash flow is more stable, more secure, and more predictable. And therefore, you don't need to wait till retirement or one day, someday. You can bring that forward potentially if you can build assets from ISAs or pensions or directly or through a company if you have a limited company. Just so many different ways now that people can participate, and they need to, in my view, in order to at least make a choice about how they're going to approach it.
Yeah. So we've mentioned ISAs and SIPs, which I think are two of the tax efficient savings vehicles that people would know a lot about. Now, I know, Kevin, you know a lot about Ssas, which is another type of investment saving vehicle. And Ssas stands for Small Self-Administered Scheme.
Yeah.
So could you give our listeners a bit of an introduction to what Ssas is, how it works, and how it might differ from the other sort of pensions that they've been used to?
Yeah, sure. So if you think about a pension as a trust with a trustee, and you mentioned the word trustee or custodian earlier on, all pensions are a form of trust. When you delegate the money to a third party, somebody else is the trustee and you're in the rear seat. If it's a retirement vehicle, you're in the back seat. You're not in control of the direction. You're not in control of the fees, pretty much. You're really not much in control. So you hope that when you get there, everything's going to be okay. What a Ssas does, it puts you in the driving seat. It means if you've got the right amount of interest, in other words, the inclination to recognize that risk is when you don't know what you were doing. So get to learn, spend some time understanding risk, understanding assets, which is what we teach at Wealthbuilders. Then if you can do that, you can start to participate, but not from hoping that somebody's doing a good job, but you're in control of that yourself. So a Ssas then is a trust fund for a business owner to run on behalf of a family or a small business. Maximum number of people is 11. Some curious legal framework which says, you've got the big final salary schemes on one side, you've got the big money purchase schemes on the other, but right in the middle there's a tiny sliver of land that's only available to business owners, not employed people, not self-employed people, not LLPs. You have to be a director of a limited company. So we spend our time trying to find directors to say, if you're the right kind of person, you can take control of your money. And that taking control does a number of things. One, it allows them to think about claiming back corporation tax. I've never met a business owner yet who loves paying corporation tax. They don't like it because that money's gone.
Mm-hmm.
But if they can make that contribution, instead of putting it off thinking my pension is my business, or the other way around, my business is my pension, and they start to build a fund by claiming back from the tax, basically from tax relief, and then they're putting that money into a fund, and they're in control. They can start to express their own DNA. They can say, well, I like property, so I can buy property. I like investing in businesses, they can invest in businesses. I like gold, they can invest in gold. So whatever you want to do, as long as you understand it and the law allows it, and you can build some expertise around it, then you can take a much more proactive and creative stance towards building your wealth. And many business owners we meet suddenly change their mind and start to like the idea of pension. And one of the aspects, for example, and I mentioned COVID earlier, is the fact that a Ssas is uniquely and only a scheme that allows at least 50% of the money that's accumulated in the Ssas. And remember, you can have up to 11 people, so you can put husband and wife in the scheme, you can have business partners in the scheme. You're building up a much bigger pot and you're sharing the resources so that one, you divide the cost between 2, 3, 4 people. And two, as you've got more money, you can invest in more things. You can be a bit more proactive. You could buy a property instead of investing in the stock market if you want to. You've got a business that needs a property. You could buy the property and pay rent to yourself so that the money's going round in a virtuous circle. So allowing you to be much more in control of what it is you want to do, why you want to do it. And also, in some cases, you can lend money, as I said, back to the company. Well, in COVID, when businesses struggled, wouldn't some of them have been grateful for the knowledge that their business could have loaned them money just to stabilize the business, and then loan the money if they want to expand the business? Notwithstanding there's risks in both of those approaches, but at least the potential to understand that a Ssas can be a source of funds and be a source of funds to lend back to the company. As they're focused on the business, then the pension can help them achieve more with the business, as well as being able to diversify into a wider range of assets, because they are the trustee, and if the law allows it, then they can invest in what they want to invest in, including, of course, the most popular asset of all, which is property.
Okay. And so within that Ssas, you're allowed to invest, you said, in anything that you're sort of legally allowed to invest in. Is there some sort of administrator involved in that you present your investment case to? I want to invest in this particular investment type, and then there's some sort of administrator independent to the trustee there?
There is, and that's wise, because we don't want people to get it wrong. So the fact that a Ssas has usually, not always, but has an independent administrator known as a Ssas administrator, and they act to do 3 things. One is they often will run the bank account so that people can't send money directly to themselves inadvertently. Number 2 is they'll file compliance tax returns to the revenue each year, basically to confirm they're doing the right thing, so they're not breaking the rules. And number 3, act as a good sounding board. If someone comes with an investment that they want to make, they will perhaps have a conversation about the sense of that, not to say you shouldn't do it, but to give them a sense of whether you have balanced the risk, have you taken all the risks on board appropriately.
Mhm.
So I think it's a grown up. It's not for everybody, as I said earlier, but it is for many people, and we're seeing a growing community of business owners and property business owners
Yep.
are wanting to do that. And property in particular, I have to say, because recent government interventions in property, the taxation of property owners meant many of them have created their own limited companies, and that made them eligible for Ssas. Whereas before, if they own properties in their sole name, they would.
Mhm.
So this proliferation of property owners with historical pensions that they've had in the past from personal pensions, Sipps, can, if it's appropriate, move that money into a Ssas, combine it with others in their family or their business, and do much more entrepreneurial things, provided it's within their skill set. They're
Mhm.
paying the right due diligence and attention to it, and they're understanding that building assets and diversifying those assets rather than having all their eggs in the stock market on its own is a useful thing to understand.
Yeah. And I imagine with 11 people, up to 11, you would have a fairly strong benefit from pooling resources together. Because I know when we look at particularly commercial property, it simply is the case that as you can access larger assets, you also get to access better quality tenants, sectors that you may not have been able to access as well. You just have a bigger investable universe. And so commercial property is, from what you're saying, quite a popular asset class for Ssas investors. Have you got some examples or sort of case studies or something that you can think of where people have successfully invested in commercial property within their Ssas pot?
Oh, absolutely. So we can really look simplistically at a company that I'm working with, bizarrely, funeral directors.
Okay.
So, and they've got a funeral home or a chapel of rest, which was owned by the company.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it was paying corporation tax. It was in the company's name. So therefore not inheritance tax free.
Mm-hmm.
We simply bought out the value of the property from stock market funds, which got converted into cash. The cash got converted into the property.
Yep.
Now the property's owned in trust. So instead of paying rent, well, not in this case because they owned the property already, but now that property is fully ring fenced, protected from capital gains tax and inheritance tax, and it allows the rental income that they're paying themselves to build up tax free.
Yeah.
So an absolutely elegant way to get multiple tax breaks.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And they didn't even have to pay stamp duties. One of the things that was interesting about that is the lawyer who arranged the transaction charged some stamp duty. You don't pay stamp duty on a connected party transaction between a company and Ssas, so we got the stamp duty back for them.
Okay.
So just an interesting way. It shows you that even the legal profession can sometimes not necessarily understand all of the implications of transferring a property. But transfer is not the only way to do it. You can buy premises and become a landlord. And increasingly with commercial properties, well, a commercial landlord can be relatively hands-free from the process instead of really hands-on, and of course more tax efficient if it's owned in the pension scheme as well. By the way, Sipps can do that as well.
I was going to say I know Sipps can do
Some
commercial
anyway.
property. I don't think you can do residential buy-to-lets in your Sipp, but I know you can do that in a Ssas.
You can't really hold residential. Let's clear that one up. Residential property is residential property. It can't be held in a pension at all.
Okay.
But there are shades of things that look like residential, like, for example, care home, student hall and residence, maybe apart hotel, children's home, homes that provide care together with the accommodation. Now, they can often be held within a Ssas, whereas an out-and-out residential, 3 Acacia Avenue, which can be rented out to a third party, you can't hold that in any kind of pension at all. Now, again, we don't know whether or not, interestingly, if the government allowed that, it might help create the 1.5 million homes that they need and want to build. They did it. actually moot this, around, I think, maybe 2015.
Mhm.
They talked about allowing Sipps to invest in residential property and overseas property. And then there was a sort of a huge lurch of people looking to buy properties in Portugal and Spain and so on. And the government
Right.
turned around and did a quick volte-face on that one and said, "Oops, we best not do that."
Mhm.
For whatever reason they did it, they pulled the plug on that. Who knows where they'll go, because we've got a new government, we've got a new regime. Who knows what they're going to do in terms of taxes or
Yeah.
incentives and so on. It'll be an interesting watching you. Maybe you'll have a few people on a podcast after the 30th of October to talk about, what are the implications here for property, for pensions, for business owners generally.
Yeah, so it's definitely becoming harder to be a buy-to-let landlord in the UK. I think being a private landlord is difficult. There's sort of rules around renters reform, changes to the interest deductibility rules, and so on. And one of the things that we've been looking at is what are the alternatives to being a buy-to-let landlord? Because there are around 1.6 million buy-to-let landlords in the UK, and I think a lot of them are frustrated
I'm scared.
and scared about changes. We're filming this at the end of September. In a month, we're going to have the new budget, and there's potentially additional regulation that's going to be lumped on to those private landlords. So I think with our company, we've done a real comparison between what it means to be a buy-to-let landlord and being a commercial property landlord, and the real differences there are in the structure of the lease and the roles and responsibilities of the landlord under a AST, or a short-term lease for buy-to-let property, and a typical 5 to 20 year fully repairing and insuring commercial lease. So the responsibility of the landlord for a residential property, a buy-to-let property, is that they're responsible for the maintenance, they're responsible for the insurance, they're responsible for finding new tenants whenever those tenants move out. They're typically on 1 year lease terms. You compare that to what they call a fully repairing and insuring lease in the commercial space, and that means that the tenant is responsible for reinstating the building back to you in the same condition as when they purchased it, or better, right? And during that time, they're often running a business from that property, so they want to keep the fittings and fixtures and carpet and paint all looking nice, so that their customers are happy. They pay for the insurance, and they sign a lease that's typically at least 5 years long. So you're not trying to replace the tenant every year if they choose to.
And I guess the implications of any breaches in the terms of the lease are easier to follow through than the current challenges with non-paying tenants in residential properties. I think what I'm seeing in my community is increasing themes around property.
Mm-hmm.
We're definitely seeing commercial to residential under permitted development.
Okay.
I've seen lots of people almost creating value for themselves by buying an asset with a commercial pounds per square foot and then turning it into residential pounds per square foot, which is a lot higher.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're able to exercise their own skill to create value in a way they can't do in the stock market. There isn't anything they could do today that would add any value to their stock market portfolio. Mm-hmm. The other thing I'm seeing is a growth in the area which you're interested in, I think. Even in my own town, I'm seeing sort of healthcare things popping up, and we're seeing an increasing interest with dentists buying not one practice with a chair or two chairs in their premises, but looking to buy multiple premises with multiple seats. I think that's what they call it these days. Mm-hmm. And I think the healthcare combination of care plus property is a very exciting one, and one that I'm seeing our own Wealthbuilder members increasingly interested in.
Yeah, we particularly like healthcare because it creates such a strong, sticky geographic market. So to your point, if you're a dentist and you will have your patient list of 10,000 patients, 90% of those will be within 3 kilometers of the place where you operate from.
That's a big dentist, 10,000 patients.
Yeah, so they've got a large patient list. And so they're really tied to that physical location, because if they decide to pick up and move, even 10 kilometers away, a majority of those patients aren't going to stick with them. They're not going to move. My dentist moved. I wouldn't go travel, get in my car and drive 10 Ks to go see it.
Well, I guess, the vast majority probably wouldn't, but some would.
Some would. You're right.
In
Some
the same way as, some women will go miles to go with their hairdresser or, beautician or whatever. And similarly with men. But I get your point. And that means they have to look after that premise.
Yeah, that premise is
fundamental, isn't it?
It's mission critical to them, and they also spend quite a lot of money on the fit out, to fit that property out. So if they move, they're going to spend that again. So all of that means to us as a landlord is that tenant really wants to stay in occupation in that building. Of course, they have to have a business that's worth staying there for. They have to be successful. If they're not running the business well, you have a problem, same as they have a problem with that location. So healthcare has that sort of operational nature to it, where the operations of that business are really fundamental to the success of that real estate. But in a needs-driven sector like healthcare, dentists, GPs, care homes, they tend not to fluctuate like things like fashion retail, which are more sort of wants driven.
Yeah.
And so there's a real strong fundamental underpin in owning healthcare real estate, and that's why we like it as a sector.
Yeah, I understand that. I think you go back to your point about your experience about the final salary schemes as we started our conversation today.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about the asset allocation and fundamentally had a reasonable amount of property as a base for that. When people are managing their own, they're not really looking at property.
Right.
So the more you can look at that, and we're also seeing that with Ssas owners. I'll give you another example you asked about, well, not just commercial property, but I think commercial property is an interesting asset and a long-term one, which I've said is great for yielding and converting to an income stream in retirement.
Mm-hmm.
Why not have 2 or 3 commercial properties with a good solid rent, and you can spend the rent, not worrying about the volatility of that, especially if you've got good long-term leases. But there is a way, certainly with Ssas in play, that because of what's known as the loan back facility, the ability for a property business owner, let's say, to lend up to 50% of the value of their pension to their own limited company.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they could use that money to acquire an asset which could derive an income in their life today. Give you an example of that. One of our clients had a decent pension pot. They can lend up to 50%. So in this case, it wasn't all of it, but let's say they loaned to their own property company £100,000. With that £100,000, they bought a dilapidated property. Not very much competition on a dilapidated property because most buy-to-let investors need a mortgage. So he bought it in cash. In fact, it's he and she, it's a husband and wife combo.
Mm-hmm.
They bought the property in cash. Then because they're property professionals and they know their market, they went to their local authority. And the local authority loaned them interest-free $40,000 to bring the property into a good state of repair.
Okay.
All right. Now, the Ssas earned an interest from the loan.
Mm-hmm.
So the Ssas, the pension, was happy. Got 1% over base. So if base is 5%, they're getting 6%. Well, that's probably a reasonable return anyway. So the Ssas gets 6%, but the family gets to keep the asset.
Yeah.
Because then they refinanced the property, paid the Ssas completely back. The Ssas has now got its money back, and they've got a property paying them £1,000 a month. Now, not when they're in the 60s, today.
Mm-hmm.
So the flexibility of different pension vehicles, with Ssas in particular, for the right audience, can be very, very powerful, both for the short, medium, and long-term wealth planning, which is why I like it so much, at least as a thought provoker.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a good place to wrap up. I think we started with defined benefit pension schemes and final salary, and to go with a sort of a short tour through some of the other retirement saving vehicles and the strategies that can be used within those retirement saving vehicles. And I think that's a That's a really interesting one, and it shows the shift from my employer is going to sort out my retirement savings, my pension from the day I retire until I die, to I'm going to take charge of it. And I think a lot more people need to appreciate that they are in the driver's seat now. There aren't these final salary schemes, and they need to be thinking about ways to use all of the tools available to them.
Yeah, nicely said.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks very much for the invitation.